Imagine a not-so-distant past, where the rhythmic hum of machinery resonated through vast factory halls, a symphony of German precision. The air, thick with the scent of cutting oil and molten metal, was the fragrance of progress, of an economy meticulously engineered for dominance. You saw Klaus Richter, a 52-year-old Meister, his hands, calloused by decades of dedication, expertly guiding a complex component through its final calibration. He moved with the quiet confidence of a man whose world was predictable, built on the unshakable bedrock of Made in Germany. His firm, a proud Mittelstand manufacturer, was the unseen heart of Europe's automotive giants, its gears meshing perfectly within a global machine. Every precisely machined part, every flawless assembly was a testament to a system that promised stability, prosperity, and an inevitable ascent for those who played by the rules. This was the era when Germany was not just an economy. It was an economic philosophy, a promise etched in steel and ambition. Tell us, where in the world are you watching this unraveling from? Share your thoughts in the comments below. But what if that bedrock was merely a veneer, concealing deep fissures beneath? What if the very principles that fueled Germany's ascent ultimately became the chains binding its future? You are about to witness how the once unquestioned German-led European economic orthodoxy, widely regarded as the guarantor of continental prosperity, is now demonstrably structurally flawed. This isn't just about Germany. It's a universal lesson in adaptation, resilience, and the perilous cost of clinging to outdated dependencies. We will reveal why its rigid adherence to past paradigms has made it less agile than even smaller nations, and why the stagnation you observe in Germany, contrasted with unexpected dynamism elsewhere, is not an accident. Few dare to speak this truth because it challenges decades of deeply ingrained belief, forcing an uncomfortable reevaluation of what we thought we knew about stability and success in Europe. For decades following the Cold War, Germany stood as Europe's undisputed economic engine, its prosperity a beacon for the entire continent. Its model was a marvel: export-led manufacturing, powered by an abundant flow of cheap Russian energy, all underpinned by rigorous regulatory consensus and an unwavering commitment to EU fiscal orthodoxy. This wasn't merely a national success story. It was the blueprint for continental wealth, deeply integrated into global supply chains and buttressed by an unparalleled reputation for engineering excellence. The promise was clear, if unspoken: scale, institutional maturity, and strict adherence to established economic principles would perpetually yield superior results. Germany's leadership and its seemingly unshakable economic model became the permanent anchor of the European project, elevating millions like Klaus Richter into a stable, aspirational middle class. This was the world before the true crisis, a world where the German economic structure appeared impervious to fundamental challenges. If you want more insights that pierce through the noise and explain what nobody else fully breaks down, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss what comes next. Klaus Richter embodied this success. His mornings began before dawn, the familiar rumble of the factory floor a comforting prelude to his day. As a Meister, his role was not just about technical skill, it was about stewardship, guiding younger engineers, imbuing them with the same dedication to precision and quality that defined his career. He took immense pride in the Made in Germany label, a badge of honor on every component his firm produced, a symbol of reliability recognized worldwide. For Klaus, his work was more than a job. It was a pact. He had pursued education, mastered his craft, worked diligently for decades, and paid his taxes, all in the unwavering belief that the system would unfailingly reward his effort. He envisioned a secure retirement, a comfortable life for his family, a future as predictable and well-engineered as the components he helped create. He was, in essence, the mirror of an entire generation, trusting in an implicit guarantee. You understood this world because you lived in a similar one, or aspired to it. This wasn't just Klaus's personal story. It was a national narrative, a testament to an economic orthodoxy that seemed to defy gravity. Germany's industrial might, its meticulous regulatory framework, and its strategic position within Europe created a powerful current that lifted all boats. It was a system where hard work translated directly into tangible security, where economic forecasts were less about uncertainty and more about steady growth. The collective illusion was potent. Scale, institutional maturity, and strict adherence to established economic principles would always yield superior results. Germany's leadership and its economic model were the permanent anchor of the European project. Yet, beneath this seemingly unshakable surface lay a vulnerability, a dependence on untested assumptions about geopolitical stability and resource availability that few dared to question, let alone examine. This perception of invincibility, this unwavering faith in the German model, permeated every aspect of life, from the smallest family budget to the largest industrial investment. It was a profound comfort, a reliable hum beneath the surface of daily existence, assuring you that the future was simply an extension of the prosperous present. The economic currents seemed to flow in one predictable direction, upwards, towards greater integration, deeper specialization, and an ever-expanding global reach. No one truly envisioned a scenario where the very foundation of this prosperity, the cheap energy, the unbroken supply chains, the unquestioned market access, could suddenly, dramatically be pulled away. The idea of fundamental structural flaws was alien, almost heretical within this established paradigm. But the truth is, this era of perceived permanence was always finite, built on a delicate balance of geopolitical and economic conditions. This is not fiction. It is consequence. The first fracture in this seemingly unyielding system was not a sudden explosion, but a quiet, almost imperceptible shift, born from what seemed like astute strategy. For decades, Germany pursued its Ostpolitik, forging deep economic ties with Russia, a decision framed as pragmatic, a path to peace and prosperity through mutual dependence. It was hailed as a modern approach, ensuring an abundant, cheap flow of natural gas crucial for its industrial behemoth, a cornerstone of its export-driven economy. This energy lifeline, seemingly a stroke of geopolitical genius, fueled the factories, powered the homes, and underpinned the competitive edge of firms like Klaus Richter's, creating an illusion of invincibility. It was a choice that, at the time, felt less like a gamble and more like a guaranteed advantage, anchoring Germany's industrial future to a resource that appeared limitless and eternally affordable. This decision, to embrace Russian gas as a primary energy source, immediately yielded a spectacular boom. German manufacturing output surged, its factories humming with a newfound efficiency, translating directly into unparalleled export competitiveness across global markets. The Made in Germany label, already synonymous with quality, now also implied cost-effectiveness, securing its position at the apex of the industrial world. This was the immediate, tangible effect, a golden age of industry where every unit of energy seemed to multiply economic gains. But beneath this glittering surface lay an invisible error, a silent dependency deepening with every passing year, transforming what appeared to be a strategic advantage into an existential vulnerability. The cost structure of an entire nation was being built on a foundation that was politically precarious, unbeknownst to the workers on the factory floor. Over decades, this seemingly rational energy policy accumulated into a profound structural dependency, one that silently eroded the system from within. Germany's heavy industry, the very heart of its economic prowess, became meticulously optimized for energy costs that were not merely low, but artificially so, and perilously subject to geopolitical whims. Imagine an athlete training relentlessly on a treadmill set to an impossibly easy pace. They become incredibly efficient at that specific speed, but utterly unprepared for a sudden increase in resistance. This was Germany's industrial complex, unknowingly building its muscle on a foundation of sand, making it brittle, inflexible, and acutely exposed to any tremor in the global energy market. The true cost of this cheap energy, the hidden dependency, was precisely its political fragility. Simultaneously, Germany's unwavering commitment to export-led growth, intertwined with highly globalized supply chains, amplified this vulnerability. While it made the nation an undisputed export champion, its intricate web of dependencies stretching across continents meant it was acutely exposed to every international trade shock and energy price fluctuation. The system was designed for maximum efficiency in a stable world, not for resilience in a turbulent one. For Klaus Richter's firm, the first subtle signs of dissonance began to emerge. Delivery delays from distant suppliers, unexpected price hikes for raw materials, and an intensifying, almost predatory global competition. The gears of the predictable machine were no longer meshing as smoothly, creating a subtle but growing sense of unease. Where do you see these subtle shifts playing out in your own life or economy? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you want to understand how seemingly correct decisions can lead to profound, long-term consequences, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. We're dissecting the unseen forces shaping our world, one critical insight at a time. Klaus, like many in his position, initially dismissed these disruptions as temporary, mere ripples in the vast ocean of global commerce, confident that the established order would inevitably self-correct. Yet, the reality on the factory floor became increasingly stark. His once thriving company, a bastion of German precision, began to grapple with crippling energy costs, its monthly bills skyrocketing to previously unimaginable levels. The rhythmic hum of machinery, once a sound of prosperity, now carried an undertone of anxiety, as management discussed scaling back production or even shifting certain processes overseas. The sheer effort Klaus and his team poured into their work no longer translated into the same predictable returns. A quiet but persistent betrayal of the unspoken pact. The news, once a comforting backdrop of economic growth, now brought unsettling reports of other iconic German factories scaling back operations, laying off workers, or even relocating entire production lines to more cost-effective regions, including parts of Eastern Europe. This wasn't merely a cyclical downturn, it was a systemic unraveling, a clear signal that the underlying structure itself was faltering. The system that had always rewarded diligent effort with tangible security was no longer delivering on its promise. What was once perceived as an isolated incident at a competitor's plant began to feel like a pervasive trend, a chilling premonition of a future where industrial might was no longer a given. For Klaus, this created a quiet but profound sense of structural betrayal. He had done everything right, pursued education, mastered his craft, worked diligently for decades, paid his taxes, and believed implicitly in the collective European project and its German anchor. Yet, the bedrock promise that hard work guarantees a stable future, once an immutable truth in Germany, was now visibly crumbling around him. This wasn't a personal failure. It was the system itself. The grand design he had trusted his entire life, that was failing him. The gnawing frustration grew, a bitter taste of disillusionment replacing his lifelong expectation of a secure, predictable future. This wasn't an accident. It was the inevitable systemic consequence of divergent structural choices. The system's logic, built on assumptions of perpetual cheap energy and unbroken global chains, began its terminal failure precisely when Germany's industrial heartland, deprived of its cheap energy lifeline and exposed to volatile global supply chains, could no longer maintain its competitive edge. Meanwhile, smaller nations like Hungary, having actively diverged from this rigid orthodoxy by pursuing more pragmatic, state-directed policies, began to demonstrate unexpected resilience and attract crucial investments. The problem was no longer just about the cost of gas. It was about a fundamental structural flaw, silently eroding the very foundation of German economic identity. You witness how this seemingly rational energy policy, once a source of competitive advantage, accumulated into a profound structural dependency that silently eroded the system from within. Germany's heavy industry, the very heart of its economic prowess, became meticulously optimized for energy costs that were not merely low, but artificially so, and perilously subject to geopolitical whims. Imagine an athlete training relentlessly on a treadmill, set to an impossibly easy pace. They become incredibly efficient at that specific speed, but utterly unprepared for a sudden increase in resistance. This was Germany's industrial complex, unknowingly building its muscle on a foundation of sand, making it brittle, inflexible, and acutely exposed to any tremor in the global energy market. The true cost of this cheap energy, the hidden dependency, was precisely its political fragility, a consequence exacerbated by the Energiewende's premature phase-outs. This vulnerability was amplified by Germany's unwavering commitment to export-led growth, intricately woven with highly globalized supply chains. While this strategy undeniably forged the nation into an undisputed export champion, its intricate web of dependencies, stretching across continents, meant it was acutely exposed to every international trade shock, every distant political upheaval, and every energy price fluctuation. The entire system was meticulously designed for maximum efficiency in a stable, predictable world, not for resilience or agility in a turbulent, unpredictable one. It was a finely tuned machine, yes, but one whose vital components were scattered globally, making it susceptible to failure from any single point of fracture, a design flaw overlooked in the pursuit of pure economic output. For Klaus Richter's firm, the initial subtle signs of dissonance began to emerge not as abstract economic data, but as tangible daily frustrations. Delivery delays from distant suppliers became more frequent. Unexpected price hikes for essential raw materials eroded profit margins, and an intensifying, almost predatory, global competition squeezed every aspect of their operations. The gears of the predictable machine, which Klaus had always trusted, were no longer meshing as smoothly, creating a subtle but growing sense of unease that permeated the factory floor. His once thriving company, a bastion of German precision, found itself grappling with crippling energy costs, its monthly bills skyrocketing to previously unimaginable levels, directly impacting the viability of their long-held business model. Meanwhile, as Germany clung to its established paradigms, another path was being forged, one born of necessity and a starkly different philosophy. The EU's collective response to successive crises, marked by austerity and rigid fiscal rules, compounded Germany's reluctance to pivot towards a more agile, strategic industrial policy. This contrasted sharply with nations like Hungary, which, unburdened by the same historical orthodoxies, pursued proactive, state-directed economic models. These smaller nations, often dismissed by the German-led establishment, began to demonstrate unexpected resilience, strategically attracting crucial foreign direct investment with targeted incentives and streamlined processes, sidestepping the very bureaucracies that constrained German industry. The immediate effect of this divergence was stark and undeniable. Germany's industrial heartland, once vibrant, began to hollow out, its factories struggling under untenable energy prices and a restrictive regulatory environment that stifled adaptation. Simultaneously, news reports once focused on German industrial prowess now highlighted significant new investments flowing into Hungary and other Eastern European nations, transforming them into attractive hubs for manufacturing and innovation. For Klaus, this wasn't just distant headlines. It was a chilling premonition of a future where industrial might was no longer a given, where the very landscape of European production was fundamentally shifting before his eyes, making his own future increasingly uncertain. If you want more insights that pierce through the noise and explain what nobody else fully breaks down, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. We're dissecting the unseen forces shaping our world, one critical insight at a time. The cumulative effect of these divergent paths was a progressive deindustrialization of Germany, a slow but relentless erosion of its manufacturing base, long considered the backbone of its prosperity. The very Made in Germany ideal, once a global benchmark of quality and reliability, began to lose its competitive edge as costs soared and agility diminished. Conversely, Hungary, by actively forging an alternative path, solidified its position, transforming into a viable economic counter-narrative within Europe. This wasn't merely a transfer of production. It was a redefinition of industrial power, shifting influence and opportunity to regions that were once seen as mere recipients of German capital, now demonstrating a surprising capacity for self-determination. For Klaus, the rhythmic hum of machinery, once a sound of prosperity, now carried an undertone of anxiety, as management discussed scaling back production or even shifting certain processes overseas. The sheer effort he and his team poured into their work no longer translated into the same predictable returns, a quiet but persistent betrayal of the unspoken pact he had trusted his entire life. This created a profound sense of structural betrayal. He had done everything right, pursued education, mastered his craft, worked diligently for decades, paid his taxes, yet the bedrock promise that hard work guarantees a stable future was visibly crumbling, shattering his expectations and leaving him with a bitter taste of disillusionment. The critical structural turning point, the decision key that solidified this trajectory, occurred precisely in the aftermath of the 2022 energy crisis. Faced with an existential threat to its industrial base, Germany failed to implement a radical, comprehensive pivot towards genuine energy independence, aggressive industrial reshoring, and a streamlined regulatory environment. What was needed was a complete overhaul, a bold reorientation of its economic priorities, but instead, the nation largely committed to a long-term strategy of managing the decline of its heavy industry, tacitly accepting a future of reduced industrial capacity. This wasn't a choice for decline, but a failure to choose otherwise, an acceptance of inertia. You might ask, what could have been done differently? What path was left untaken? Imagine a rapid, coordinated, and massive investment in all available domestic energy sources, including a reevaluation of nuclear power, coupled with a bold industrial policy that prioritized resilience and strategic autonomy over pure cost efficiency. This was the fork in the road, the moment where a fundamental choice could have redirected Germany's destiny. But this wasn't done. Not due to lack of resources, but due to deep-seated ideological commitments, political inertia, and a lingering, almost fatalistic, belief that the traditional model, given enough time, would eventually self-correct, a dangerous delusion. The lost opportunity cost of this inaction is now irreversibly eroding Germany's industrial leadership and its high-wage job base. Positions once considered unassailable, now being actively contested by more agile economies, including its Eastern European counterparts. From this critical point, Germany's economic trajectory is largely locked into a path of diminished competitiveness, a future where its influence wanes. Simultaneously, Hungary's alternative, state-directed model becomes more entrenched, presenting a stark, viable counter-narrative within Europe, demonstrating that agility and pragmatic control, not rigid adherence to orthodoxy, are the true currencies of resilience in a turbulent global landscape. The truth of this unraveling is no longer confined to boardrooms or economic white papers. It is etched into the very landscape of German industry. You see it in the stark announcements from titans like BASF, once an unshakable pillar of the German chemical sector, now publicly declaring significant reductions in domestic production. These are not temporary adjustments. They are strategic expansions of their operations into the United States and Asia, a permanent pivot away from the very heart of Europe. This seismic shift signals a fundamental reevaluation of Germany's industrial viability, a painful admission that the cost structures and regulatory burdens at home have become untenable. It's a tangible, verifiable exodus, transforming what was once unimaginable into an irreversible reality, impacting countless lives like Klaus Richter's, as the ground beneath their feet shifts decisively. This structural decay extends deep into the supply chains that once defined German engineering prowess. Bankruptcies among Germany's once robust automotive suppliers, the unseen backbone of its most iconic industry, have surged with alarming frequency. Each closure represents not just a lost business, but a severed limb of the intricate industrial organism, indicating a systemic vulnerability that permeates its core. Simultaneously, a more subtle yet equally profound shift is emerging. Anecdotal evidence, now increasingly supported by demographic data, points to a growing trend of highly skilled German youth considering emigration. They are driven by a chilling perception of dwindling domestic opportunities and a less promising future in a nation that once symbolized stability and upward mobility. This brain drain is a direct consequence of a system failing to deliver on its implicit promise. The macroeconomic indicators paint an undeniable picture of this divergence. While you observe Germany's GDP per capita stagnating, its industrial output continuing a worrying decline, and its lead in key innovation metrics visibly eroding, another narrative unfolds just a few hundred kilometers to the east. Hungary, in stark contrast, consistently reports higher GDP growth, strategically attracts crucial foreign direct investment, and demonstrates a surprising degree of energy security relative to its size and historical context. This isn't about one nation simply outperforming another in a cyclical market. It's about two fundamentally different economic models yielding demonstrably different results under pressure. These are not temporary blips in the economic radar. They are the irreversible structural transformations confirming the thesis of a flawed orthodoxy. These are not isolated incidents you are witnessing. They are tangible facts, verifiable shifts that validate the core argument. The German-led European economic orthodoxy, once deemed the guarantor of continental prosperity, is indeed fundamentally structurally flawed. Its rigid adherence to outdated dependencies and its reluctance to adapt have left it less resilient and agile than a smaller, more pragmatically directed model. The ongoing stagnation you observe in Germany, juxtaposed with the unexpected dynamism in Hungary, is not an accident of fate. It is the inevitable, systemic consequence of divergent structural choices, a world where the old certainties have crumbled, and new realities are taking hold before your very eyes, demanding a radical reevaluation of what stability truly means. If you want more insights that pierce through the noise and explain what nobody else fully breaks down, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. We're dissecting the unseen forces shaping our world, one critical insight at a time, helping you connect the dots of a rapidly changing global landscape. If this trajectory persists, the systemic consequences for Germany, and by extension for Europe, will be profound and far-reaching. Future German generations will inherit a nation with a dramatically diminished industrial base, a hollowed-out manufacturing core that once provided high-wage jobs and global influence. They will face the burden of higher taxes necessary to sustain social services with a shrinking productive economy, and significantly reduced opportunities compared to the era their parents knew. The implicit social contract, built on industrial prosperity and upward mobility, will unravel, leading to a future where the promise of a secure, predictable life, once a birthright, becomes a distant memory. Conversely, the youth in nations like Hungary, operating within a different social and political framework, may find themselves benefiting from a more resilient and strategically directed domestic economy. This shift will irrevocably diminish Germany's role as the undisputed economic hegemon of Europe, leading inevitably to a more fragmented and multipolar European economic landscape. Smaller, more adaptable nations, once seen as recipients of German capital, will gain relative influence by demonstrating alternative paths to resilience and growth. This fragmentation, this weakening of collective economic power, will undeniably leave the European Union less influential on the global stage, vulnerable in geopolitical and trade negotiations. This story, therefore, teaches a critical, universal lesson that extends far beyond the borders of Germany and Hungary. Economic orthodoxy, no matter how historically successful or deeply ingrained, can transform into a crippling liability when it becomes rigid and unresponsive to radical external shifts. It reveals that sheer scale and the legacy of established institutions do not inherently guarantee resilience or perpetual prosperity. Instead, in an era defined by polycrisis and relentless change, adaptability, pragmatic resource management, and strategic national control can emerge as the decisive advantages, charting a course through turbulence that others, bound by dogma, cannot navigate. This is not merely a localized tale of two European nations. It is a universal parable for any nation or economic bloc that clings to outdated paradigms, refusing to confront the structural flaws within its own foundations. It exposes a fundamental pattern. The illusion of perpetual stability, carefully constructed upon specific, transient geopolitical and economic conditions, invariably shatters when those conditions dramatically change, forcing a brutal reckoning with fundamental structural choices. You should care deeply about this divergence because these forces of structural change and the imperative for adaptation are global, impacting every economy, compelling a fundamental reevaluation of what true national resilience truly entails in a world where the old rules no longer apply.